Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Nebula. Last month, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia ended its best season in years. While the last few seasons have had some real bright spots, like the Ireland episodes, I think this is easily the most consistent the show has been since season 11, maybe 10, both of which were really stellar seasons in my book. Before I really get into this season though, I should probably say there will be spoilers if that's something that you care about in sitcoms. With that out of the way, let's get into my review of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, season 16.
It's all about the product, Sean. I want them to see the whole thing.
So the season before this, season 15 from 2021, opened with two episodes that I honestly wasn't a huge fan of. The first was Ultra Topical, 2020 A Year in Review. The second, The Gang Makes Lethal Weapon 7, which directly dealt with the show's legacy in a very obvious way. Now, neither of these episodes were terrible, and commenting on current events has always been part of the Sunny package, but I think they pointed to something that was starting to grate on me with recent Always Sunny, that the show wasn't interested in doing low-stakes episodes about its actual characters anymore. It was starting to feel like every episode had to be something of a stunt or a grand statement, constantly being meta and reckoning with itself. Eventually, I do think that season found its groove, as the Ireland episodes were a great way to change things up and do something unique and new, while also keeping the focus clearly on the characters themselves. Specifically, in that case, Charlie. At its worst in the early going, I think season 15 often felt like the writers speaking directly to the audience, instead of having anything new to say about the characters that we've been watching for years. Maybe that's why I think the Always Sunny podcast has ended up being a really positive development for the show itself. That direct communication with the audience happens, hours and hours of it. And while it's probably oversimplifying things to say that that led to a more satisfying season, I don't think it's a coincidence that this season feels a lot more confident and less bogged down in self-referential self-awareness, especially in these early episodes. The first two episodes, The Gang Inflates and Frank Shoots Every Member of the Gang, are both good at balancing everything the show is great at. Mainly, balancing social commentary with finding fresh angles to explore with this cast. I'm sure that's incredibly difficult after so many episodes, but they make it look easy here. I especially liked that scene in the second episode where Frank assumes that Dee and Dennis are gonna shoot him on the beach and is totally cool with that, but flies into a rage when he discovers that really they were asking him to get rid of his gun. I also thought that episode had a really strong B-plot, which saw Charlie and Mac go on a road trip to claim small pieces of their family heritage, with Charlie's being a jar of teeth that's a family heirloom, which is apparently a reference to a story Danny DeVito told the cast when they first met him and were completely baffled by.
Yeah, we went to lunch in Beverly Hills, and he immediately sits down and tells us about a box that his father has that's full of teeth.
It's a fun nod to a story that fans might recognize, but it doesn't overwhelm the episode at all or make it feel like an inside joke. Bringing back Charlie's sisters, who haven't appeared since season 1, could have felt a little strange and awkward. I don't think anyone really would have blamed the show for just not acknowledging them again after so many years. But instead, it ends up feeling really natural, and their characters, who have built an ASMR empire for themselves off of this gross jar of teeth, really felt like a natural extension of Sunny's world, but put into a new setting. The third episode of the season, The Gang Gets Cursed, was also really solid. It was gross and strange in a way that reminded me a lot of the early days of the show. But I think it's episode 4, Frank vs. Russia, that shines a bit brighter. The script, from former Community writer and current Sunny podcast producer Megan Gans, weaves together riffing on a strange news story, the chess sex toy scandal, and callbacks to the season 5 classic The Dennis System in a way that feels really earned and fits with the story at hand. I think it's one of two episodes that really show season 16 at the peak of its powers, with great moments for the whole cast, especially Danny DeVito, who's given room to run wild with a few simple lines and, pulling a lot of goofy faces as only he can, as Frank is told what chess moves to make in a very Always Sunny fashion. The episode after, which features both Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul, maybe isn't quite as strong. I honestly think the episode kind of peters out at the end, but the first half is good enough to make it a worthy entry. The gang deciding to approach people outside of their world for a business deal is almost always guaranteed to be great, and that more than holds true here. And the scenes in the nightclub where Mac is dressed like a Miami Vice character were definitely some of my favorites this season. I also really liked the fact that the episode never mentioned Breaking Bad, with the gang only knowing Cranston from Malcolm in the Middle and assuming Paul is the grown-up Malcolm. It was a simple gag that just kept on giving. Episode 6 is the Chuck E. Cheese episode, where the gang heads to Risky Rat, their favorite childhood restaurant, only to find that it's completely changed. All the rough edges are gone, and the gang is horrified. I will say the choice of a Chuck E. Cheese type restaurant as the stand-in for how raising kids has changed since the 70s and 80s is kind of an odd one, because when I think of these places, I think of like struggling relics just trying to hang on with a business model that definitely peaked in the 90s, not like a place where kids are getting therapy from mascots to deal with their aggression issues. It just felt like kind of an odd fit for the kind of commentary that the episode is attempting. That didn't end up mattering to me all that much though, because the jokes land. The choice to not show what actually happens when they throw the power switch at the end was a really good one, as just having that hard cut to the results was definitely my favorite moment of the episode. But I think it's episode 7 that really sealed this season as something special for me, because The Gang Goes Bowling was my favorite episode of season 16. There's nothing especially high concept here. Everything you need to know is in the title. Well, almost everything. This episode brings back a lot of old recurring characters, the waitress, the McPoyles, Gail the Snail, and Artemis. But it's not really aiming for callbacks, or even to recontextualize those characters or shift their status quo. Instead, it just aims to be a really well-written, tight sitcom episode that's elevated even higher by great performances. The result is a half hour that I think feels a lot like great later day Cheers episodes. It feels right that the guys wrote this one themselves, because what I mean by that is this is clearly the product of a team that knows these characters like the back of their hands. Whereas sometimes in the past couple seasons, it felt like they didn't want to settle for just writing a great Sunny episode. Everything needed to be really high concept or have some grand statement to make about the state of the show or the entertainment industry. Here, it just feels like we're watching these guys do what they do best, with a premise as simple as they come. Dennis breaking his hand to prove that he's stronger than the waitress is one of the best Glenn Howerton moments in the show's history. And it's not just the main cast that shines. I really like the use of the recurring characters here. I can be mixed on the McPoyles, like they're such broad and over-the-top performances that they can often upstage entire episodes in a way I don't always love, but I think we got, to me, the exact right amount of them in this one. I also thought Artemis and Gail the Snail were kind of wasted in season 13's lackluster The Gang Beats Boz ladies reboot, which really leaned into the show commenting on itself, but that's definitely not the case here, as both characters ended up being as funny as I think they've ever been on this show. Mary Elizabeth Ellis is also clearly having a great time as the waitress, who gets a very rare win here. I just really loved this episode. I think it demonstrates that this show can continue to feel vital without having to have big stunt episodes or a high concept gimmick. Not that those are always bad, they're definitely not, but late series Sunny tends to lean on them a lot. And I think it's great that the show clearly has some life left in it without having to resort to that stuff. The final episode of the season, Dennis Takes a Mental Health Day, I think it ended up being my least favorite of the bunch. That's not to say it was bad. It's a strong season. I don't think any of these episodes were bad. But this one definitely feels beamed in from a slightly different show. Maybe a Curb Your Enthusiasm type sitcom about these guys in real life. And these guys in real life, you know, have a lot of money. It was impossible to stop thinking about the podcast and all their conversations about Teslas when watching this one, because it felt more like a reflection of that than their actual Sunny characters. Now, to be fair, I think everyone can relate to how aggravating dealing with like company apps and the way that they can make something that should be simple wildly complicated. But a lot of the jokes here feel overly predictable and kind of sluggishly paced. Honestly, I'd rather hear Howerton rant about boba tea on the podcast than watch a pretty rote scene about it here. Still, this episode went down fairly smooth, and spending a half hour with Dennis is always going to be enjoyable enough. Really, my one actual complaint about this season is pretty simple. 8 episodes? It's too short. They've done this for a couple years now, and I'm sorry, I just don't like it. Always Sunny was never a show with the longest episode orders, but there's a big difference between 8 and 10 in how it feels as a viewer, at least to me. With episode 7, it really felt like the season was confidently hitting its stride, only for it to end a week later. Much like Party Down, a sitcom I love and which also returned to TV with a brutally short 6-episode season this year, it just feels like the show no longer has time to settle into a groove before disappearing again, probably for years. So yeah, I missed the slightly longer episode counts. I doubt they'll ever return, but I just wanted to put that out there. Still, taken as a whole, it was a blast to have Always Sunny back, and to have it back this sharp. And while I don't think I could claim this as my favorite season, I do feel pretty confident about putting it right up there with the best seasons that the show has done. And after all this time, that's a pretty incredible accomplishment. Well, there clearly wasn't enough Always Sunny this season, but don't worry because we have you covered. Lately, I've been checking out creator Maggie Mayfish's series Unrated. I specifically really love the Before the Hays Code video, which explored Hollywood before all the restrictive boundaries came in. It's an original series you can only find on my streaming service Nebula, and of course, that's just the start of what they have to offer. I have some originals on there as well, and my videos there are always ad-free. And I'm far from alone, with great creators like Lindsay Ellis uploading exclusive videos, along with Thomas Flight, Windover Productions, Nando V Movies, and so many more. So if you sign up using the link below, you can support me directly and get both Nebula and Nebula classes for 40% off an annual plan. Basically, just over $250 a month. It's an incredible deal on a service that just keeps getting better, so check out that link in the description below.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.